Hi. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. One less.
Nine, 4, 20. 9, 4 is the 9th. They're fine. They're fine.
You're unmuted.
Ooh, no, that's not good.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful to see everyone here. Although I have to say, Nathan Casimir, you look younger than I imagined. Okay. I think that's everybody in. Okay. Terrific. Wonderful to have everybody here. Hi, Drew. Okay.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. I think you do need to mute yourself, though, if you're the background noise.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Okay. Thank you, and wonderful to have all of you here. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. The way we usually do this is that most of the time the screen is shared to look at the mikvaot. I try and check the chat for questions, and you're welcome to call attention to unmute yourself if you have a specific question to ask. Otherwise, please mute yourself unless you're in the process of talking. And let me just find the mikvaot set for this shiur. Should be here. Should be here. Hang on a sec. I apologize that I had a meeting I didn't expect just beforehand. Here we go. Okay. So everybody should now see the screen. Should now see the screen. I should have gotten somebody else to. Okay. Should have gotten somebody else to handle the waiting room. My fault. Okay, I'll try and handle that next time. Maybe next time I'll ask someone else to do that. Okay. So what I want to do, in this shiur is to take you through. I call it the history of Halakhic Libel, and the question that we want to address is whether anybody ever really held that bathtub mikvaot were sufficient. So I want to take you through what is one of the standard claims about one of the classic proponents of a bathtub mikveh, and tell you what it actually said. And then at the end of that, we'll make our own decisions about what the issues would be with bathtub mikvaot based on that argument. And then in the Wednesday shiur, what I hope we'll do is take a look at Rabbi Shalem's more recent attempt at arguing for bathtub mikvaot, and talk about what his basis is, and how we relate to that argument. So I'm not attempting a comprehensive survey of all the issues related to bathtub mikvaot. I'm not an expert on mikvaot at all. I want to take you through two of the classic discussions on that issue. Okay. So here, let's take you through here, right? The first source, and I apologize. I'm still okay. I need to minimize this and do this. There we go. Okay. No, this is not the right set. I apologize again that I'm a little bit slower where I should be on the mikvaot. Yeah, that was the right thing, and I was wrong. Okay. Everybody see this? Everybody can see this now? Yeah. Okay. So here is the let's check, make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So here is in the introduction to Rabbi Dr. Yitzchak Frank's book called Grammar for Gemara. There is a sorry, I'm having trouble looking at my own screen and people keep entering. Okay. I think it's 12:06, so anybody who, I'm going to stop looking at the waiting room. Anybody who's not here is probably not going to get in. Okay. Let's find the right screen. Wow. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right. If there's somebody who can't see your screen or see the screen, then please chat me. So Rabbi Nathan Kamenetsky in the book Grammar for Gemara includes the following note. With regard to grammar, I note that my revered father, the Rabbi Kamenetsky, Alav Shalom's father, was Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, the head, the Rosh Yeshivat Torah Vadas. Rabbi Kamenetsky himself was the head of Yeshivat Itri, and he is probably most famous for a work called The Making of a Gadol, which became controversial at some point, and is certainly one of the most fascinating reads in recent Jewish history. So he says, I held up my revered father's Zatzal held that its study is included in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah because its knowledge is crucial for reaching correct halachic conclusions. He cited, okay, I will, there we go. He cited a grammatical error which led a well-intentioned author to propose building a mikveh in every Jewish home. Ignorance of the gender of the noun etzba in Rambam Hilchot Sefer Torah 9:9 had led that individual to advocate mikvaot that were undersized and invalid. their use would have resulted in massive Isurei Karet. Knowledge of grammar is thus not parparod l'chachma, which the Tosfot Yontiv defines as studies undertaken to enhance knowledge, which is not to be denigrated, but gufei halacha, studies that affect halacha. Okay, so now we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. One question, obviously, is whether it's true that grammar is included in Mitzvah Talmud Torah. That's not our issue today at all. Our issue is it true that a well-intentioned author was led to propose a shiur for mikvah, right? A size of mikvah that is undersized, invalid, and results in Isurei Kares as a result of ignorance of the gender of the noun etzba in Ram Hilchos Sefer Torah 9:9. So what I want to do is first try and see what we know about the noun etzba in the Rambam. Well, we know the noun etzba generally. We know the noun etzba in the Rambam. Try and figure out whether the author actually got it wrong, and if the author got it wrong, did it really lead to them proposing shiurim for mikvah that were undersized? And we'll see how that relates back to the question of mikvos in bathtubs. Okay, so let's start with what is the gender of the noun etzba. So there's a pasuk in Shemot that says Vayomru hachartumim el paro. So the rendition said to Paro, etzba Elohim he. Okay, that seems pretty clear. Etzba Elohim he tells you that the gender of the noun etzba is feminine. Similarly, in Yirmiyahu, right, it tells you that the plural of etzba is etzbaot navuv. So in both of these, it seems pretty clear that if you know grammar, the gender of the noun etzba in the Rambam is feminine, and now we have to take a look at the Rambam Hilchos Sefer Torah tet tet and see what would change, whether it's feminine or masculine. So here's what the Rambam says: Rochav hagudol ha'amur b'chol ha'shiur ha'elu uvishar shiurei Torah kula. So the width of the gudal that is mentioned in all these shiurim, and in fact in all the shiurim of the Torah, hu ha'etzba ha'benoni. Okay, this is the etzba ha'benoni. So now I have to try and figure out what would change if you think that the word etzba is male, which is presumably the editor of that the error of the well-intentioned author above, and if it's feminine. So it seems to me that the only possible thing is that if etzba is feminine and habenoni modifies etzba, so what it should be is etzba habenonit, right? That's what the correct text in the Rambam should be, but it's not. The text in the Rambam is etzba habenoni. So if it's etzba habenonit, right? So we would say it's the etzba which is benoni. But now that it's etzba habenoni, it must be the etzba of the benoni. And so and so if you understand that the word etzba is feminine, whereas habenoni is masculine, so you know it must mean the etzba of the benoni, and that tells you that the proper meaning of the Rambam is it means the etzba of the average person, and therefore the author must have made the mistake and said that it means instead the etzba habenonit, right? In which it's the etzba which is benoni, whatever that might mean. But etzba habenoni, if you understand that etzba is feminine, cannot mean the etzba which is benoni. It must mean the etzba of the benoni. Okay, I'm going to stop for a moment and say, does everybody understand that point? Does anybody have any challenges to that claim that must be the difference between, that must be the error the author made? He must have read etzba habenoni as a single phrase, the etzba which is benoni, as opposed to the correct interpretation, which is the etzba of the benoni. Okay, so yes.
I don't have the phrasing in front of me, but is it possible that the benoni modifies the word shiur rather than the word etzba?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's possible. If you don't have the text in front of you, but I don't think that's possible. It's clever, but I don't think it's possible.
Not even to mention who a Benoni is.
We're not going to talk about who a Benoni is. Right. We don't know who that is. A Benoni is whatever the average person is, right? That's what we're going to assume right now is the Benoni. Okay, and that must be, right? So we have the correct interpretation, right? The correct interpretation is that it's the etzba of the Benoni, and the incorrect interpretation, the error, which is the etzba which is Benoni. So now I want to first find out, is this true or not? Is it actually an error? So here we'll get on one of my hobby horses. I am not a great believer in not a great believer that grammar is reliable that way. At least prescriptivist grammar. One of my wonderful colleagues at Gann Academy used to pound into her students in Tanakh that grammar leads to meaning, and I, being subversive, would often pound into my students grammar sometimes leads to meaning, and often leads to error. So in this case, the question we have to ask ourselves is it really true that the word etzba is rigidly gendered in the Rambam the way it's rigidly gendered in Tanakh, right? So it's plausible to argue that etzba is rigidly gendered in Tanakh as feminine. But is that really true? In order to claim that you can use grammar to interpret an author, you can't use prescriptivist grammar and say this is what the author should have said. What you have to say is that the author shares, right? The author shares your understanding of grammar. So while Ellen is entirely correct that not knowing grammar sometimes leads to error, but presuming that the author knew grammar the same way you did is, or meant grammar the same way you did, is a very dangerous assumption. So let's take a look. So here is the Rash Mishans in his commentary to mikvaot. So the Mishnah says, Erev mikvaot kishfoferet hanod. Right. So if you have two bodies of water which you want to you want to kasher, one of them is valid as a mikveh, one of them is not, right? Whatever the ways are in which these two bodies of water are supposed to each be a mikveh, and in order to make them to make them either collectively or separately, to make it collectively a kosher mikveh, they have to be connected. So they have to be connected by a hole that is at least as large as the shvoferet hanod, which whatever that may be, which is defined as, right, you have to be able to turn two etzbaot in a complete circle. So now, what do we mean by the word etzbaot? So the Rash says, v'lo me'arba b'tefach. So the shtei etzbaot does not mean the etzbaot of which four make a tefach. Right? Tefach is a fist, which is halakhic measurement, and in order, right, and so the Rash Mishan says, when we say the size of the hole that needs to join mikvaot is two etzbaot, it doesn't mean the kind of etzbaot that make four into a tefach, because we say tefach arba begudol, shis bezutrasi. So a tefach is composed of 4 gudols, 6 zutrasis, or 5 etzbas. Okay, 5 etzbas. So v'hashta ba'etzba hi habenoni. So the etzba here, right, that he says that the shtei etzbaot, that means the etzba which is intermediate. Okay, so it means the finger of middle size. So here we have etzba, benoni, and he. Okay, so the Rash Mishans knows that he, right, etzba is feminine because he says he, but he still says benoni, and it clearly here means the etzba which is the middle. Okay, in case you want it, right, want it to even clearer, the Rush says, Shtei etzbaot she'amru, right, when they said two etzbaot, referring to the same Mishnah, b'veinonit shel kol adam. Now that's a sort of ambiguous phrase. What does that mean, the beinonit shel kol adam? So he tells you, v'lo be'arba b'tefach. It doesn't mean from among those which are 4 to the tefach, right? So here he used beinonit, damrina tefach arba begudol shis b'sutrasi chamesh be'etzba'asa. The etzba, now here he doesn't, right, he probably says, hu ha-benoni. Okay, so the Rash and the Rush are happy to say etzba hi ha-benoni, etzba hu ha-benoni, and to mean that the etzba is the middle finger. Okay, and then so in case you think you need that somebody who's a genuine Sephardi to match up with the Rambam, so here's the Rashba and Torah Sabayis. Kama shiur shvoferet hanod, kishtei etzbaot chozrot betoch hanekev, uve'eza etzba amru, bevenoni lo begudol velo biktana ela be'etzba. Okay, so in the Rash and the Torah Habayit, it's entirely clear that the phrase etzba ha-benoni, we don't really care whether it's benoni or benonit, right? The Rash uses them interchangeably. We don't care whether it's who or he. It means, right, the middle finger, meaning the finger which is intermediate between, right, because we'll have to talk about that means, between the gudol and the zutrasi, which it takes 5 fingers to, 5 of these etzbas to make a tefach. So I think that the grammatical argument is just completely wrong, right? It can't be that the well-intentioned author made a grammatical error by reading etzba ha-benoni as if etzba and benoni can modify each other, because in fact it's entirely clear that etzba and benoni modify each other in the Rosh, modify each other in the Rush, modify each other in the Torah Bayit. No evidence whatsoever they should not be. However, the fact that the author's claim, that the Rabbi Kamenetsky's claim that the author erred is itself an error, doesn't mean that we misinterpreted the phrase etzba ha-benoni as meaning the average, the etzba of the benoni, the finger of the average man. Maybe that's the correct shot, and if that's the correct shot, then if the well-intentioned author said something different, then the well-intentioned author is wrong, even if what generated that wrong was not a grammatical error. And it turns out that it's entirely clear in the Rambam that etzba benoni cannot mean the finger which is intermediate, but has to mean the finger of the average person. And the reason it seems to be is this, right? The end of that Rambam says, "B'chol tefach amur b'chol makom hu arba etzbot mizu." Okay, a tefach, the Rambam says, which is made everywhere, is 4 etzbaot of this etzba ha-benoni. Now we just saw that the etzba which is intermediate between the gudol and the zutrasi is 5 to the tefach. So if the etzba which is intermediate is 5 to the tefach, and the Rambam's etzba ha-benoni is 4 to the tefach, it follows that the Rambam must not mean the finger which is intermediate, but rather the Rambam must mean the finger of the intermediate person. So Rabbi Kamenetsky's claim that the author made an error is incorrect, but maybe it's still right. Rabbi Kamenetsky's claim the author made a grammatical error is incorrect, but maybe the author, whenever we find him, made a substantive error. Okay. Okay. Yes, Nathan says, right, that's why I put in the Rashba. I guess the Rashba is right. The Rashba. I don't think the Rashba spoke Romance language specifically, so I don't think that argument is entirely valid. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look. The problem now is, but how did the Rambam make the claim that the etzba is 4 to the tefach when all these when these Rishonim all know the Gemara Menachos says that the etzba specifically is 5 to the tefach? It's very awkward for the Rambam to say that the etzba is 4 to the tefach. So if you take a look at the Gemara Menachos they're all citing, so it's Amar Rav Papa, tefach de'oraisa, dalid begudol, shis biktana, chamesh betilsa. So while all these Rishonim had the girsa in the Gemara of chamesh be'etzba, there was a girsa which said chamesh betilsa. Right, so chamesh betilsa, tilsa is the third, so it's right presumably the middle finger. But if you had the girsa tilsa as opposed to etzba, now Rashi says that tilsa is the etzba, and then another girsa which I think is later arises, and Siv has an explanation of this. We can look at later, which I have not looked up in detail, where the two girsa got combined and it became chamesh vitilta be'etzba, right, which seems like 5 1/3 to the etzba as opposed to 5. But it seems to me that the simplest explanation is the Rambam had the girsa chamesh betilsa, which is the same girsa that we have. And right, it exists in Kisvei Yad, and therefore the Rambam did so. No reason to not to use the word etzba to mean 4 to a thing, and the Rambam did not think the word etzba meant the middle finger. Okay, we'll have to see what the Rambam thinks it meant, but the Rambam clearly does not think it means the middle finger. What he thinks it is, I guess we know, is that it's that the etzba is the gudol, which is 4 to the tavach, and that's in fact what the Rambam seems to say. Rochav hagudol amor b'chol shiurin. Who etzba ha-benoni, right? So the Rambam thinks that the gudol, that the fingers relevant here are right is the gudol, which is 4 to the tefach, which is, and it's the gudol of the average person. Okay, so if in fact an author read the Rambam as saying that it means the middle finger, that might very well be an error, and that might very well lead to a halakhic error. Okay. Let's take a look at what the Rambam, is that clear that that's what the Rambam actually held? So the Rambam in Hilchos Mikvos, which is really what we want, right? Interpreting that the Mishnah and Mikvos that everybody that the Rush and the Rush said So b'mehu shira nekef shu kishoferet hanod, right? What does it mean? Berochav shtei etzbaot beinoniot. There's our right shel kol adam v'chozrot bo. It's the right. It's the width of 2 etzbaot beinoniot shel kol adam. So now, what does he mean? Right here, it's like great evidence. Etzba beinoni. What does the Rambam mean by etzba beinoni? He says ve'inan begudal el shtei etzbaot rishonot min adalatra pasayad. So the Rambam says here that the etzbaot beinoniot shel kol adam are not the gudal. Rather, they are 2 fingers to the first 2 fingers of the palm. So the Rambam understood, right? So the Rambam is consistent. He understood that the statement in mikvaot, when it said shtei etzbaot, is not talking about what etzba means generally. It doesn't refer to any specific finger at all. It refers to 2 fingers. As opposed to, ordinarily, the Rambam thinks that the etzba, which is said everywhere, as opposed to this place, the Rambam thinks that is the gudal, which for now, I guess we can assume that the gudal, since it's the largest finger, we can assume, well, we have to figure it out, right? Because he says rochaf agudal, so it's the width of the largest finger. But the question is the width of the finger which is widest, or is it the width of the longest finger? So you could conceivably try to get the Rambam to still have emsa benoni mean the middle finger, but it's very hard to figure out why that should be 4 to the tefach. So the most likely thing is the Rambam thinks that you use the thumb, and etzba benoni means the thumb of the average person. Okay, and that in fact is what the Beis Yosef reads it, right? So the Beis Yosef says we have this this Tosefta which says shtei etzbaot shamru bevenonit shel kol adam v'lo merba'a b'tefach. So when they say two etzbaot, they mean the benonit shel kol adam and not the one which is 4 to a tefach, meaning not the gudal. Right? Meaning that we say the Gemara tefach dalad begudal. So here we're talking about the benonit shel kol adam. We're not talking about the gudal. Okay? The etzba, but the Shulchan says the etzba hu ha benoni uvei misharinan hacha. So the Beis Yosef says what that means therefore is that the etzba, which is the benoni, is the middle finger. V'kach kasvu harash v'harash. V'kach in divrei Rabbeinu, and that's what the Rash and the Rosh and the Torah hold. Umash b'divrayim the etzba dehacha, but now all of a sudden he changes. The benoni doesn't mean the middle finger. Mash b'divrayim the etzba dehacha hainu etzba hasamoch legudol. It means the pointing finger, the finger that is next to the thumb. V'chol sheshtei etzbaot mehem chozrot b'toch hanekev havik yishoferet hanod. V'al Rambam katav v'perik chet mehilchos mikvos shem shtei etzbaot rishonot min arba shebipasayad. So the Shulchan Aruch gets that the Rambam over there thinks it means 2 other fingers, but he thinks that what the Rash and the Rosh think in etzba is the pointer, whereas it seems to me the most likely pshat, if you have the girsa tilsa, is the middle finger. But if you didn't, right, since these Rishonim had the girsa etzba, not tilsa, there's no reason that they have to think that. Okay, so just to summarize, in the Rambam, it seems pretty clear that what etzba habenoni in our original Rambam, that etzba habenoni means the finger of the average person, even though that cannot be demonstrated grammatically. And the Rambam thinks that the etzba you have to use is the thumb, which is the finger that 4 of which make a tefach. Okay, and now that we've shown this in other ways, we can see it explicitly in the Rambam. The Rambam Hilchos Shabbos says, "Etzba shebesharin ba b'chol makom hu rochav hagudol shel yad v'tefach arba etzbaot." Rambam here says v'chol etzbaot begudol, and the Rambam Hilchos Tefillah says zeh etzba shemoshchin bo b'chol Torah kula hu agudol v'hu anikra bohen yad. Okay, so Rambam is entirely consistent. We always measure thumbs, and thumbs are 4 to the tefach, and we measure by the average thumb. Now, whether we paskin like the Rambam is an interesting question, because it seems that that most other Rishonim think that we should really measure most things by the middle finger, right? And the Beis Yosef thinks that you measure it by the pointer finger. So that's a separate issue. But in the Rambam, and the Rabbi Kamenetsky only addressed the Rambam, in the Rambam it's pretty clear it's the thumb, and it's the thumb of the average person. Okay, there are other Girsa issues that we have to address here. Okay, notice that the Ben Aryeh is a parish, I don't know who wrote it, on the Rambam Hilchos shifts. He says Rochav Agudla Omar Etzba Benoni. He says this is a mistake. It should say Etzba Omar hu rochav hagudol habenoni, because it doesn't make any sense to say that that etzba is a more specific term than gudol. Gudol is a more specific term than etzba, and he gets that from the Rambam, Shut HaRambam, where the Rambam says exactly that line. Shekol etzba niskeret b'inyan shiurei davar midivrei halacha hu rochav hagudol habenoni. Okay, it's the width of the average thumb. And then the interesting thing is that in the Shut HaRambam, the manuscripts tell us that what should happen here is that there should be a picture, but but because of the absence of a picture, we don't know what the Rambam meant by Rochav Agudol Be'emsa. And similarly, in the other version, the Parador version, there it changes Rochav Agudol Me Emsa, not Habenoni, but Me Emsa. And again, we don't have the picture, so we don't know. There are pictures in the manuscripts, but we don't know what the pictures were. Right? The assumption is that the pictures drawn in our manuscript are those of the scribes, and don't tell us anything about the actual meaning of the Rama. So Me'emsa raises another possibility, as does the picture. Right? So if Rochav Agudol HaBenoni just meant the average thumb, who needs a picture? But if what it really meant, the Shut HaRambam, and these are translations, possibly translations from the Arabic, I guess, it must be, Rochav Agudol Me'emsa, maybe the Rambam is telling you where on the thumb you have to measure. And there's yet another issue of controversy. But that wouldn't affect the Mishnah Torah, because the Mishnah Torah still says Benoni. Okay, right, and the Rambam, right, in the Parish Mishnayos is also B'tia ha'etzba sheba modin habohen shel yad mimutzat b'viriyata. Right, the previous translated said it's the gudol Benoni b'viriyasa. There seems to be no way out of saying that the Rambam thinks it means the average thumb. Okay, so the last thing I just wanted to point out before we move on to the to other issues in the Rambam is, remember, Rabbi Kamenetsky built everything. Right, he said that the author made a mistake that led to a chiyuv kares because he misidentified the gender of the word etzba in the Rambam, when the Rambam said that the rochav hagudol amru choshurin is hua etzba habenoni, and if it really means the middle finger, then it should have been etzba habenonit. So I just point out that actually, after all this work trying to figure out whether etzba habenoni could or could not mean the finger which is intermediate, it turns out that in all the manuscripts of the Rambam, and this is adopted by all the new critical editions, the word etzba doesn't actually appear in the Rambam at all. It's rochav hagudol hu habenoni. Right, so there's no right. So the gender of the word etzba tells you nothing at all, if these are correct about what pshat in the Rambam is. Just whatever the gudol is the benoni. But now that we know that the gudol is the thumb, so we pretty much know what the Rambam means, and the question is, did anybody else make an error? Right? Could the author that Rabbi Kamenetsky attacks have really made a mistake in the Rambam and thought it meant something other than the figure of the average person, which would have led him to adopt a shiur which is way too small? Now, there are people who get things really interestingly, right? So there's a Gemara in Ksubos which says that at least it counts off the fingers of the hand. The fingers of the hand are zu zeret, zu kmitza, zu ama, zu etzba, ze gudol. Okay, here are our 5 fingers. Okay, but there's another Girsa, Vatican 112, which reverses this: zu agudol, zu etzba, zu ama, zu kmitza, zu zeret. And the Chut Hashani says that that there are people who learn this as right, that this, he said, this girsa, the original girsa says rejects the pshat of misha mefarish the gudol hu etzba ktana. Some people think that the gudol is the pinky and not the thumb. Now, why do they do that? I think they did it because they have the fingers counted in the opposite order. And he has an explanation of this, right? And he's in fact right that Rabbeinu Bechaye has it both ways. He says v'yesha pirshu right, v'dak yaboan shu b'lashon Torah nikra b'lashon chachamim gudol shu av mikulam, right? So the thumb is what the sages call gudol, which is the thickest of the fingers. V'yesha pirshu ki av mikulam nikra zeret, but some people think the thickest is the zeret. V'hakatan shebekulam nikra gudol, and the word gudol really means pinky. Okay, and the second finger, right, is called the right, and the finger next to the thumb is called expa. Fine, right. So I just want to point out that there's somebody who thinks that the gudol is the pinky. So a great way to get a tiny shiur for a mikveh, if a mikveh is measured by fingers, which as we'll see is one of the ways of measuring it, is to say that, going back to the very beginning, that when the Rambam said that rochav agudol hua etzva habenoni, what he meant was the pinky, and that would get you a much smaller shiur than the thumb. So there's no grammatical error about the word etzba that can get you to too small. That can get you to a too small a shiur, because the word etzba doesn't even belong in the Rambam, and there's no grammatical significance to it at all. But it's possible to misread the Rambam as having the wrong finger, right? And to think that he's talking about the pinky and not the thumb, because there is a pshat in Rabbeinu Bachya that says that, and so that's a way in which somebody could make the error. However, once you know that the Rambam says that this is the finger which is forward to it, the Rambam says this is the finger which is forward to a tefach, and the Gemara says that there are 3 fingers by which the tefach can be measured. One of them is 4 to a tefach, one of them is 5 to a tefach, and one of them is 6 to a tefach. So you can't possibly make the gudol, which is 4 to a tefach. You can't possibly make that the pinky. It has to be no smaller than the 3rd biggest finger, because there has to be 2 other fingers that are smaller than it. So I don't think it's very plausible that any author would have made this mistake either. And the Bir Rachav says, and I think it's correct, that the obvious pshat in the Rambam is rochav agudol hu etzba benoni kilomer me'adam habenoni. Right. So it's entirely clear that that there's no way, all right, there's no way to understand the Rambam for real as meaning anything other than the etzba, which means the thumb of the average person, and there isn't any way based on those that anybody could get the shiur of mikveh to be too small. Okay, but there are other ways you can get shiur to be too small, right? The Chassam Sofer says, right? So let's go back to the Rambam. Okay, so the Rambam said here that the rochav hagudol amor b'chol shiur halalu u'b'shar shiur etura kula hu habenoni, right? Meaning the sum of the medium-sized person, or the medium-sized thumb. We'll see if that matters. Ukvar dikdaknu b'shiuro, and the Rambam says, I've been very precise about this measurement, so it's very ironic if we got this wrong. Umitzanu rochav shevas orod benoniot, and I turned out it's as wide as 7 barley grains, 7 benoniot barley grains. Now, so there is such a thing, I think, as 5-year barley, but I don't think it means the middle barley grain. I think everyone understands this to mean a medium-sized barley grain. Zu b'tzad zu b'dochak, right next to each other, pushed against each other. V'henk orach shtes orot berevach, and they're as long as the width of 2 barley corns. Okay, right. So the Rambam says you can measure this very precisely in terms of barley corns. However you did that, I don't know anything about barley grains, so I couldn't tell you what that means. But the Chassam Sofer says, in order to show the halakha to the students, I went and I measured the thumbs of the average person in our day, and I took 7 barley corns of our day. And he thinks that, well, another way you could make the mistake is it could be that the shiur of a mikveh is based on the size of the thumbs in the time of Chazal, but our thumbs are different sizes, right? And that could change. Right, that could change everything. But the Chassam Sofer says, I measured, and thumbs and barley corns are still in exact proportion. Now, that wouldn't prove anything, because I could still say, well, you know what, maybe both thumbs and barley corns shrank, and the shiur mikveh still has to be much bigger if it's measured in fingers, because their fingers are bigger than ours. So by the time you got to Rav Israel Hildesheimer, right, and now we're in 19th century Germany, it turns out that everybody has a different measure of halachic measurements. The Amma of Frankfurt, he says, is this long, right? 56.9 centimeters, but the Amma of Fresen is 62 4/5 centimeters, and the Amma of the city of Estreich is 63 1/5 centimeters. The Imkain, who's going to have the chutzpah to get involved in this issue? Everybody has a different measure. Libi Omerli, but Rav Hildesheimer says, Shekadmanenu tafsu b'chol medina umdina, hamida nehuga sham lisod sharehem, vishvu midat etzpa lemidat sel desham. He says, you know what? Whatever, right? Our ancestors used whatever the standard measurement was in their local area, and in the end, he says that we're right. So that what should we do, halacha? Right? He says, right? He says it seems to him that there is no person who can give a standard shiur for the etzba. Ein ish alei adama shechol letet shiur katsuv klali over lechol makom. Bein anachnu chachamim bekim yoter mikadlenu zal asher anachnu lefnehem ken anasu tehanak. We are dwarves standing not on the shoulders of giants, but standing in front of giants. And therefore, he says, so we can't figure out if all these people had separate shiurim, we would have no way of knowing who was right and who was wrong. So it seems like the answer is either everybody should follow their tradition, right? So whatever in your town you use, right? You use the measurement that is traditional in your place. But if you're moving to a place where there is no clear Halakhic masoret about the size of the ama and therefore the finger, Yaseh et asher harlunu chazal. Yivakesh emtzai ben etzba yoter gadol shenimsa sivatav ben etzba yoter katan. Take a look at the biggest thumb around you and the smallest thumb around you, and halfway between them, Bashir emtzai ben shneim, hu etzba benoni shechol yismuch alav b'shirei Torah. Right. So Hildesheimer says, just right that really there is no standard size for the etzba. Chazal probably set it up that everybody used their local, whatever people thought was the local was the average of the local things, and you would have bigger etzbas in a country with taller people, and shorter etzbas or people with longer fingers, and shorter etzbas if you lived in a community of people with stubby fingers. And there's no problem with that. Everyone is allowed to rely on their own tradition, and failing that, you just go around yourself and measure people. Thank you, Elisa, that it tells an inch. Okay, right? So they matched their fingers to whatever the standard inch was. Thank you very much. Okay, that's the position of Rav Hildesheimer. The Rabaz, Rav Salah Shafran, argues that the Chassam Sofer contradicts himself, and so there's no right. And he goes through all the people who have their own positions. We looked at all the sources he saw. He sees already, and he says that in the end, right? He says it's clear that you have to measure by the thumb. Okay, right? We went through all those makurat, and you can be makil in other things, but you can't be makil in shiurei Torah. Okay, Rav Moshe Feinstein has his own position, which is very similar to Rav Hildesheimer's, and he says kibor she'ein lanu b'shiurim shenemru be'etzbaot ela kefia anashim she'bizmanenu. He says we just follow our own thumbs. So another, right? Again, you might think the error is that thumbs have changed size, right? You might think the Chassam Sofer is wrong and thumbs really have changed size, but the answer is it's not just localities. Where Rav Hildesheimer said everyone follows their localities. It's times. If the measurement of the thumb changes, Rav Moshe says, then we follow the measurement of our own thumbs. Okay, and he has a whole pilpul about whether it's likely that the average thumb size has changed or not, because he has midrashim that he seems to take literally about Levium being 10 amot tall. But at the end of the day, he says that the pshat must be that there were exceptional figures. Maybe all the Jews were super tall in the Dor Midbar, but the average person was the same size as us, most likely. And even if it's not, he says we can follow the thumbs in our size. So there's no way you can make an error by adapting the average thumb of our time. The average thumb of our time is the proper halacha for the shiur. Okay, let's see if we talked about also goes through all the stories about which finger it is, and he ends up he quotes all the gears that we have. Okay, and he says it seems clear that the Rash says Amiyah Mefarish Harash V'Venei Shel Kol Adam equals Be'etzva Benoni Shuhu Ama. He thinks that the Rash thinks it means the middle finger very explicitly, and therefore, according to the Rash, it's not clear to use the average person. And because he thinks the Rash says Benoni Shel Kol Adam meaning the Ama, therefore Mishum Hachmim Machmarina De'Bemokan De'Modlin Begudlin Hayoter Rechavin Hu 2.5 centimeters. So that the Netziv says that the pshat is that we use the thumb, which is the average, the average thumb, which he thinks is 2 centimeters wide. But he says because he thinks, according to the Rash, that there's no pshat, there's no proof that modin be'etzba habenoni means the thumb of the intermediate person, because he thinks the Rash interprets etzba benoni to mean the middle finger, right, as we saw. Therefore, so if you put the Rash together with the Rambam, so the Rambam says it means the thumb, and the Rash says that the Rash interprets etzba benoni to mean not because etzba benoni is the thumb. The Rambam says it's the thumb, and you use the intermediate thumb. But since the Rash says it's not the thumb, therefore, according to the Rash, there's no proof that it means that you have to use the average finger. So the Netziv says we can be machmir and say we need a super large thumb, which is 2.5 centimeters, by combining the Rambam and the Rash. But he says, "Avalanan kaimelan b'chol zeh Rambam bein lakil bein lachmir." But we pass like the Rambam, which means that we go that you right. Those two positions are incompatible, and so we use the average thumb. And the average thumb he thinks is 2 centimeters. However, he says, "Ulam achar zeh v'achar iyun haytev chazarti midati ve'ikar shetovsin shiur hasheni shekasav Rambam shuzayin seorot be'uvi hu yoter b'shnei seorot be'orech v'imkenu yoter b'shnei centimeters." But the Netziv says, you know what? I don't know how big the average thumb is, and now it seems to me that if I measure barley corns, unlike the thumb sofer, I get a different measurement than I got by average thumbs, and therefore I think what we should end up is saying is that 10 tvachim is 95. 10 tvachim is 95 centimeters. Okay, so let's try and figure out what 95 centimeters would be. So 10 tvachim is 95 centimeters. So then every tefach is 9.5 centimeters. And a tefach is 4 fingers, so every tefach is 2.3 something centimeters, right? Not quite 2.5. But let's try and figure out what how big an amma is in that case. So if if 10 tefachim is 95 centimeters and an amma is 6 tefachim, so then an amma is 57 centimeters. Right? Am I right?
Yeah, that's what I got doing the numbers.
Sorry,
too.
my fault. I'm not using the right numbers, right? So he says if it's enough, then a lechi is 80 centimeters. Sorry, my fault. So 10 tvachim is 80 centimeters. If 10 tvachim is 80 centimeters, so then 6 tvachim is 54 centimeters, which means that an amma is how much? How many inches?
48, I think.
No, I'm not getting it right then. So I'm not doing the numbers right then. I apologize. I apologize. Okay, we have to leave that. No, he says around asar tvachim.
What, 54 centimeters?
Yeah.
Is approximately 21.5 inches.
21.5 inches, right. Sorry, he ends up with 21.5 inches. 21. Okay, fine. Okay. That's where the Netziv ends up. The Netziv ends up with an amma that is about 21 inches, and that's about where, right, our range generally is between right, our range generally is between 18 and 24 inches for the amma. The Netziv ends up with a number that's in the middle. That's about what we would expect. Okay, so what emerges from all this, okay, is that everyone agrees, it seems, that the pshat in the Rambam has to be that we use the average thumb, and that the average thumb is going to end up with the average thumb is going to end with a number somewhere in the range between 18 and 24 inches, which is what our general distinction is for what the amma is, right, in the United States as well. So now the question is, going back, Rabbi Kamenetsky made the claim that there was a grammatical error in the Rambam that led to an error in which a well-intentioned author who argued, let's read it again to make sure that we can see exactly what the well-intentioned author was alleged to have said. What he said was that led that individual to advocate mikvaot, this well-intentioned author proposed building a mikvah in every Jewish home, and he led to advocate mikvaot that were underused and invalid, that were undersized and invalid, which would have led to Yisur Kares. So when I reached out to a friend of mine to ask what he thought of the of the classic argument for mikvaot in every home. So he quoted this story from Rabbi Nathan Kamenetsky to me, and he said, look, it seems like the author was ignorant of grammar and made a fundamental error that led to mikvaot that were too small. And I thought to myself, that makes no sense at all, because a mikveh has a very clear measurement, and that measurement is you have to be able to dunk in it. So there's an obvious, right, you have to immerse your entire body in it. So it's very clear to me that nobody could yield a calculation which led to a mikveh that you couldn't immerse yourself fully in. So how could a grammatical error lead you to an impossible shiur? It might lead you to a shiur that we don't paskin like, but it can't lead you to an impossible shiur. So everyone agrees that the person referred to by Rabbi Kamenetsky is Rabbi David Miller. He's the only person famous for arguing in the early 20th century that, really the only person famous for arguing ever that we should build a mikveh in every home. Rabbi Miller was, he lived in Oakland. He was a successful contractor, and he wrote a book called The Secret. First, he wrote a book called Mikveh Yisrael in Yiddish, and then he wrote a book called The Secret of the Jew. And in those books, he gave you very concrete plans. Here's how you can build a mikveh in your house for only $5. And he gave you very clear plans on how to build a mikveh in your house. Now, how big does he think a mikveh should be? So he says the dimension of 40 sa'as for mikveh is clearly defined in the Talmud and adopted as the rule in Yeridea 2011. That is an amah by an amah and 3 amas high equals 18.5 cubic thumbs. Well, he says thumbs, so now we know perfectly well he read the Rambam properly that the finger is a thumb. He didn't misread that. He didn't misread it as a pinky. And he says, and he's correct, that the Gemara actually, the 40 sa'ah is 1 shiur, and the other is an amah by 3 amas high. So we know that an amah, right, some people say 21 inches, right, between 18 and 24 inches. What did Rabbi Miller say an amah is? Rabbi Miller said that what we need is for an amah by amah is 24 cubic feet, equal to 2 by 2 by 6 feet. So if 1 by 1 by 3 amot equals 2 by 2 by 6 feet, Rabbi Miller is interpreting an amah to be 24 inches, which is the largest possible amah. Nobody has an amah really larger than 24 inches. So what on earth is going on with this claim that a well-intentioned author used mikvot that were undersized, when in fact the only author they could be referring to says that it uses the largest size imaginable, 24-inch mikveh, right? So it's really quite stunning. Right, the mikveh has to contain 179.53 gallons. Okay, you can all look it up and see that that there's a whole question of what a bathtub contains, but no bathtub contains more than 80 gallons. I don't think even a single jacuzzi doesn't contain that much. So obviously he's not advocating bathtub mikvaot. And in fact, the whole point of Rabbi Miller's book is to say that you need a separate mikveh. He's telling you how to build a separate mikveh in your bathtub. And in fact, there is a chapter, and here I'm going to share a different part of my screen. So here is the Secret of the Jew, and in the Secret of the Jew, right, he tells you 40 sa'ot, right? This is the section that we saw, and if we skip to page 391, I think it is, we'll take He goes through his description of the mikveh. Sorry, am I on the wrong page? Right, he's telling you how to make a mikveh, and one of the big things he has. Okay, I'm going to cheat, and I won't look for the actual place, but let's go back to the table of contents. So here we go. Right, this is Rabbi Miller, author of Mikveh Yisrael. Right, here's his book. It has, as many people have pointed out, it has haskamos from prominent people. These prominent people include, as we'll see in a minute, right, a preface by Dr. Bernard Revel, right, Seil Kovar, who was the head of a Bezdin, right. There are lots of people who endorsed it and used it well, and threatened it, and here, and quoted it, and in his thing, one of the things he says, fundamental rules of mikveh, he tells you, here we go, a bathtub is not a mikveh. Okay, couldn't be clearer than that. A bathtub is not a mikveh, right? If we'll go take a look at page 363, it tells you a public swimming pool, right, is properly used as a mikveh, but you can use a natural thing, but a bathtub is not capitalized in mikveh. From this summary, the fundamental rules of mikveh is clearly seen that an ordinary house bathtub is not a mikveh. The bathtub has no qualification or possible claim to be considered. So now I have to go back and try and figure out what on earth was going on, right? Why does Rabbi Kamenetsky spread what I think is really a libel about Rabbi Miller? It seems, right, a claim that Rabbi Miller used shiurim that were Yisuri Kares, but actually Rabbi Miller used the largest possible shiur, and he read the Rambam correctly, thumbs. Okay, so there is an answer to this. The answer is as follows. That in the edition we saw was in 1930. But in 1930, and Rabbi Miller's book went through was very successful between 1930 and 1938. And there were lots of people who were impressed perhaps by it, but it's not at all clear that he got people to actually build mikvahs, but he got people to go to mikvah. So what happened is Rabbi Miller in 1938 decided that he had to revise his book because he decided that it wasn't working. Not enough people were building mikvaot. So he came up with an 11th edition of it. In the 11th edition, he discovered that he had made a mistake, that he had made the size of the mikveh too large. Right? He measured barley sizes, and he measured finger sizes. And you'll see what he said is, since it first came to my mind to revise it, I consulted many authoritative rabbis. I also published a special pamphlet where I declared my intention. I circulated widely. I sent copies of this revised chapter to certain well-known Jewish scholars and prominent yeshivas. Within all that time, I received no authoritative information citing facts contrary to my views. Therefore, I'm justified in assuming. So what you get is that he tells you that lots of people thought he was wrong. Lots of people thought he was wrong, but nobody gave him what he thought was a convincing argument. And therefore, Rabbi Miller went ahead and published his revised edition with a much smaller shiur of the mikveh. Okay, now what should that be? What's his size of mikveh? Sorry, I got to make sure that I get the right place. So he says, well, I went to my own home, using my own mikveh. I discovered that my mikveh was big enough for 2 people. And the Gemara says you only need 1 person. So obviously my shiur was too big. Okay, so he says, right, so I couldn't imagine that our mikvahs are actually the right size. So I recalculated it, and when I recalculated, he said, right, I made the mistake. And what happened is I took the finger breadth to be 1 inch. But this is a measurement of a person above the average size. Right? I wasn't taking the average thumb, whereas in reality, only the width of the espa of an average person is required, which is no more than 3/4 of an inch. Okay, now who do you measure? He says, when arriving at the size of the average person, it must be borne in mind that according to the Jewish rule, 13s and 12-year-olds also count. And the size of the agudal must both be taken. So he went around the world measuring people's thumbs, and he decided that the average agudal is 3/4 of an inch. Okay, 1/4 less than by his previous estimate, right? The Netziv said it was 2 centimeters. He thinks it's 3/4 of an inch, which is about 1.65 centimeters. So that's significantly less. And guess what he ends up? He says if you measure it, it turns out that the proper measurement of a mikveh is 80.57 gallons. Okay, now if you figure out 80.57 gallons, you get 10.77 cubic feet. It turns out that he's using an amma which is just above 18 inches. Okay, so this is the end result of Rabbi Miller's work. It has nothing to do with a grammatical error. He reads etzbah benoni as meaning the thumb of the average person. There's no argument about how you measure the thumb of the average person in the sense that you measure the thumb of the average person by the thumb of the average person around you. Yes, Nathan, there is such a measurement in the Netziv, but we can't, in the Rabbaz, but we can't do it right now. Great question. Right, whether you measure, how you measure the width of thumbs, where on the thumb you measurement. But basically, Rabbi Miller does not reach any conclusions that based on readings of the Rambam that are different than anybody else. You might argue that he uses people that the Rambam wouldn't have used. You might argue, if you really want to stretch it, that Benoni should mean only average men and not average person. But that's a stretch. You could argue that it means average people of average age. So you don't include 12 and 13-year-olds. Those are all right. But at the end of the day, Rabbi Miller ends up with a shiur that is 80.57 gallons, which involves an amma, which is just over 18 inches. So it's just within the range of normal. Now he tells you that his friends told him, "Don't do this, Rabbi Miller. Right? People will yell at you." And that what they told him is that instead you should use the Aruch HaShulchan. Right? And he tells the Aruch HaShulchan has a 21-inch amma, which is very much like the Netziv's, and gets you 117 gallons, which is still a lot smaller than the 177 gallons, whatever it was, that he had demanded previously. So in the last edition of his book, Rabbi Miller argued for the possibility of much smaller mikvahs, and he got it down to 80 gallons, and 80 gallons can be held by the average by a super large bathtub. So what I think happened is that now all the people who argue to defend Rabbi Miller all say, but right, how can you possibly critique him? Rabbi Revel wrote an Akdama to him, and all these other rabbis used his book. The answer is they use editions 1 through 10. Edition 11 is a revision, and that edition and the revision 11 was not approved by anybody. He tells you that he wrote to people, and they all wrote back disagreeing with him, and said at least you should use the Aruch HaShulchan. But when he printed the book, he didn't take out the Haskamos. So it is really correct that Rabbi Miller's position about the size of the mikveh is not endorsed by anybody. And I think that the reason that Rabbi Kamenetsky's father and this whole urban legend started, that Rabbi Miller misreading the Rambam, was because people tried to figure out, right? People looked at this last edition and they said, oh, look, now he's arguing for Bathtub mikvaot. That's crazy. And they said, oh, he must have gotten that by an error. But as we see, he didn't get there by an error. He read it entirely correctly. Right? He measured it by the thumb of the average person, and he even tells you, right, he says the average thumb as opposed to the thumb of the average person. But I don't think that's even that. I think even if you thought that was wrong, I don't think it's what he said at all, because he just tells you what the meaning of it is and not what the translation of it is. Okay, that's all true. We only have a couple of minutes left. But the thing is, Ray Miller, even in edition number 11, Ray Miller still says, I don't know if I have it for you here. I apologize. I couldn't download. Edition 11 is on Otzra Chachma, so I can't download the whole thing, unlike edition 10, which is on Hebrew books. But I can tell you that the chapter which says a bathtub is not a mikveh remains in the revised edition exactly as is. So it's not true that Ray Miller ever advocated bathtub mikvaot. He did advocate mikvaot of a smaller size. You could argue that a smaller size in Isser Karet, although I'm showing you that he kept an amma above 18 inches. So the question that remains is, why did Ray Miller not think bathtubs were okay? Why did he have this outlandish thing where he has all these plans, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plans as to how to build a mikveh, right? All of which are still there in later editions, right? Why doesn't he just use a bathtub if a bathtub could be big enough? So I think there are a couple of reasons, and I have to go through his explanations of why a bathtub is not a mikveh. I think there are a couple of explanations, and we have to explore each of them individually, and we may look at some of those on Wednesday. The first is that it's possible that at the time that Ray Miller was writing, most bathtubs did not have drains. And Ray Miller tells you that in order for a mikveh to be kosher, so it cannot, it has to have a hole in the bottom. And if it holds water without a hole in the bottom, and the hole in the bottom has to be modified in very specific ways, then it can't be a mikveh. So it could be that he was dealing with a society where indoor bathtubs with drains were not common. That doesn't seem so likely since he talks about how to attach your mikveh to your sewer pipe. So it seems likely that he's dealing with a community which already has bathtub drains. You could argue that he, of course, is dealing with clawfoot tubs, because what we call the modern apron tub doesn't get developed until around the 1950s. And you might argue that the way in which bathtubs, even bottom draining bathtubs from clawfoot tubs, are not connected to pipes in the same way as contemporary bathtubs, and that's what the difference is. I don't see a way in which that would be a really good. Thank you, Ari. I'm sorry I got the math wrong. Would be a really good argument. Okay, so what did he mean? So right now, what I think he meant is as follows. First of all, obviously, most bathtubs are not big enough for even a single person to immerse themselves in completely. Right? Right. Forget the measurement of 40 sa'ah, which which most bathtubs don't meet even his minimal shiur of 40 sa'ah. But you just can't immerse yourself in it completely, and nobody in Orthodoxy has argued that you can ever be Yotzei Tefillah, but without immersing yourself completely. So on the first level, most bathtubs are out. The second thing I think he says is that the Gemara says that the bathtub has to not only be able to contain 40 sa'ah, the mikveh has to not only contain 40 sa'ah, it has to contain 40 sa'ah plus the person, which means it has to have a capacity for the person to be fully immersed in it. And yet, even when the person is fully immersed, there has to remain 40 sa'ah in the water, right? So it means 40 sa'ah plus the displacement of the person. So Miller calculates that requires an extra foot of height in a mikveh to tolerate a person. So even bathtubs, even jacuzzis probably that are big enough to hold enough water are not big enough to hold enough water without overflowing. So for those, I think those are the most likely reasons that Rabbi Miller did not endorse bathtub mikvaot at all. But I think that it was easy for people to read his reduction in the measurement to 80 gallons and say, well, there are bathtubs that hold that, so he must be endorsing bathtub mikvaot. It's also possible that, I guess, that one of Rabbi Miller's grounds was that the plumbing had changed, but I think that's probably not correct. I think he simply held that bathtubs were not close to big enough, and swimming pools are. Right now, we will talk about next time about the issues of water supply. I think it is clear that Rabbi Miller intended his bathtubs his mikvahs to be filled by municipal water, and that people like Rabbi Revel and others, Rabbi Teleshkin, and other people of the day who are recognized as prominent, accepted. They had no objection to him filling bathtubs with tap water. So that issue still has to be explored in depth. But I don't think that he ever thought he ever endorsed bathtubs. And he tells you explicitly a bathtub is not a mikveh. The claim that he did, I think, is a canard. It led to this urban legend that he had made a grammatical error. Actually, Rabbi Miller's scholarship stands on his merits, and you just have to decide if you think that it's worth it to use the smallest possible amah in order to get mikvot kosher, as opposed to what we ordinarily do, which he understands fully, which is that since it's an Isser Kares, we would much rather use the largest possible mikveh. The nafkamina is, right, so when you build public mikvot, why not build large ones? He was trying to get people to build a mikveh in their homes, so he wanted to make it as small as possible. But he still believed you had to build a separate one. You couldn't use bathtubs. The question we have to address on Wednesday is maybe contemporary bathtubs have changed in some way, or some bathtubs are large enough that even Rabbi Miller would have allowed bathtub mikvaot. But in his time, and so far as we know right now, the default setting has to be that nobody in Orthodox history ever endorsed using a standard bathtub as a mikveh, and the minimum size anybody would allow for a bathtub mikveh is even Rabbi Miller, who tells you he's adopting the minimum size and basically is using the 18-inch amah, which we think is the smallest amah that that's currently seen and I think has ever been seen as plausible. Would require that a tub that holds 80 gallons plus a fully immersed person, and you can go do the research and see how many people would be able to immerse in their own bathtubs. Even if all other issues were resolved, I think it's going to be a minimal number, so one should not use Ray Miller as a precedent for bathtub mikvot nowadays on that surface. Okay, that's the end of what I have to say. I'll stay on if anybody has questions.
Sorry, I have a question.
Hi.
Hi. What do you think about? Maybe I missed this, but what do you think about a mikvaot for kalim?
I'm not addressing mikvaot for kalim. Really not. Those are different. I don't think that the measurement for sai. Certainly, you could see somebody saying that we could use a smaller measurement for kalim mikvah than for a bathtub mikvah. So I guess if that became a major concern, we could consider saying maybe bathtubs would be kosher as kelim mikvahs under these circumstances. But I think that Poskim already found a much cleverer solution around this, which is the hefker solution, or the selling to a non-Jew. So I don't, that's an interesting question. That's a really interesting question, though I had not thought of it at all. Whether a better argument can be made for bathtubs as kelim mikvahs than as person mikvahs. Seems to me like it's a better argument, but I don't want to say anything halacha.
Okay. I mean, I think I had also heard at one point that there's an argument to be made that a kelim mikvah could be 1 amma cube instead of 3 cubic.
Yeah, kelim mikvahs have much more. I haven't researched kelim mikvahs at all, so I'm not gonna say anything about it. I think I applaud the question. I would need to do research about it. I started researching this because I saw the question was coming up practically, and no one asked me about kelim mikvahs. They should have. Now I have to do research. I don't know anything about it.
Well, it would have been an issue 2 weeks ago. Now it's not as much.
Yeah, that's right. But it was already solved 2 weeks ago because people came up with the hefker and selling it to a non-Jew tricks. So so it never came up as an emergency. On the other hand, kelim mikvahs are much less carefully maintained than person mikvahs. So I could see it as a much more longer term issue in terms of COVID-19. So it's worth researching. I just haven't done the research at all. Okay, other questions?
Has it been discussed whether people think people home building mikvaot would be a good idea? Everyone who I've seen talk about it seems to assume that it would be great if we could, but we can't, or maybe we can. But the thought occurred to me that if people who can afford large home improvement projects suddenly start building their own home mikvaot, those same people presumably would otherwise donate to community mikvaot, and then there would be no money for our community mikvaot, and then you would have a situation where people who can afford big home improvement projects have mikvaot and everyone else does not.
Right. So this is actually an issue, and there are communities in which rabbis, more often people who see themselves as Hasidic rabbis, build mikvaot in their own homes, and then there are huge communal controversies about, because often there's no other mikvah in range for Shabbos, and do they have to open the mikvah or not? I don't know. Rabbi Miller in his book, imagines that you can build a mikvah for $5, and that everyone is capable of building a watertight mikvah out of plywood on their own, and he thought this would lead to the revitalization of mikvah across the country if everyone built mikvahs in their own homes. I would like to have somebody, paging Dr. Zev, I guess, research how many of these mikvahs were actually built. Did it actually work? Was there ever a havamina that people would actually build mikvaot in their own homes? It seems to me really unlikely that he got lots of people to build it. Although maybe I'm wrong, right? He has hundreds of diagrams. It should be known by archaeologists of American Judaism, right? Whether there are lots of homes with mysterious second tubs built-in furniture, right? That should be easier to find than the secret nooks of conversos and things like that. I never heard of anything like it, so I don't know. What certainly is the case, is that if you could argue going forward that maybe in the same way that that homes built for Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, or when people remodel, they put in different kinds of sinks and they put in double dishwashers. So maybe if this worked, maybe everybody should put in giant bathtubs, right? Maybe that would be a proposal going forward, right? If you really thought this was valid, right? This is part of the question we'll have to talk about on Wednesday. Is nowadays just about nobody sees this as lechatchila, right? Everybody argues, right? This is part of the history of the response. In the 1950s, right, the Helmuter Rebbe, whatever, launched a campaign against mikvahs fed by tap water, and we all upgraded to mikvahs that have some kind of rainwater in them, or maybe ice melt mikvaot. So I don't know that you could get anybody to advocate. Right, it'd take a major reversal of Halakhic sociology for people to argue for lechatchila tap water mikvaot again. What I wanted to say in this year, though, is that there was a time when Rabbi Miller argued for tap water mikvaot, and that wasn't what caused the controversy. Right, from 1930 to 1938, Rabbi Miller is a hero. What causes the controversy, I believe, is that in 1938 he shrinks the size of the mikvah, and that becomes highly controversial. And then I should know he dies in 1939. So he's not right. So he doesn't have the right. So he doesn't have the capacity to defend us anymore. And then a few years after that, the Rabbi Deutsch launches the campaign against tap water mikvaot. And I believe what happens is that then Rabbi Miller gets conflated with advocates of bathtub mikvaot when really he was no such thing. I don't know. It's an interesting question whether in the long run, whether if we wanted to, if we decided that going back to tap water mikvaot was a right strategy, whether or whether we might think that if we're rich enough now that almost everybody could afford, really, or lots of people could afford building a tub big enough and constructed properly for a mikvah in their own house, maybe we should advocate for that again if we think that would cause many more people to go to mikvah than do currently. I don't know. That's a great sociological question. Yes.
Does he discuss what happens if there's a mikvah in your house and you don't have someone watching you to make sure that you immerse fully or whatever, especially considering the fact that this mikvah, your home mikvah might be smaller?
That's a great question. Yeah, great question. He doesn't talk about it at all. I assume that he's dealing with a universe in which husbands watch their wives do it. There's a whole question about whether husbands can or can't. But we live the system we have with professional mikvah ladies who watch you in every case. And I know there's a whole controversy in Israel whether it's necessary or not, but it's a luxury. All right, it's a luxury. Everyone understands that there can be circumstances in which you can be confident that you immersed fully. And he thought, he's looking at what he sees as this disaster. Nobody in America is keeping Taras HaMishpacha, right? That's the universe he's looking at. And he's trying to revive it. And so he's not looking for all the lechatchilas in the world. I think that's the truth of it is, he's looking for the best he can. And he would tell people, I guess he would tell you, make sure that your head is lower than make sure that your head is lower and make sure that your hair, I don't know how he would have dealt with long hair, or have your husband, or most likely would have said have your husband supervise, which is an old tshuva about husbands being able to supervise, even though all the issues of being nida, but because you'll be tahora as soon as you come out, so we allow husbands to supervise, in at least in cases where the wife otherwise would be in danger. So I think that's what he would have said. But I think you're right that people now advocating, the people who have now argued that we should go for home mikvaot had better be careful about that, because if you have long hair and you're trying to squeeze yourself into the smallest possible time, the odds are that you're not going to do a very good job. Right. Also, I talk about whether you're going to be clutching the walls, all sorts of ways in which our public mikvaot are big enough that you can get rid of all these shilas of chatzitza and things like that, and all those things would certainly reasons that home mikvah would be b'diavad as opposed to lechatchila. Okay. Okay. Other questions? Okay. And great. Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope I'll see lots of you tomorrow for the triage shiur, or Wednesday for the follow-up when we talk about Rabbi Amshalem's proposal, and we'll see how it goes. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Elisa is entirely correct. Okay. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you, everyone.